The Frog Prince, a tale from the Brothers Grimm. One fine evening, a young princess put on her bonnet and clogs and went out to take a walk by herself in a wood. And when she came to a cool spring of water that rose in the midst of it, she sat herself down to rest a while. Now she had a golden ball in her hand, which was her favorite plaything, and she was always tossing it up into the air and catching it again as it fell. After a time, she threw it up so high that she missed catching it as it fell, and the ball bounded away and rolled along upon the ground till at last it fell down into the spring. The princess looked into the spring after her ball, but it was very deep, so deep that she could not see the bottom of it. And then the young princess began to bewail her loss, and said, "Oh, alas, if only I could get my ball again! I would give all my fine clothes and jewels, and everything that I have in the world." While she was speaking, a frog put its head out of the water and said, "Princess, why do you weep so bitterly?" "Oh, alas," said she, "what can you do for me, you nasty frog? My golden ball has fallen into the spring." The frog said, "I want not your pearls and jewels and fine clothes, but if you will love me and let me live with you and eat from off your golden plate and sleep upon your bed, I will bring you your ball again." "What nonsense," thought the princess. "This silly frog is actually talking. He can never even get out of the spring to visit me, though he may be able to get my ball for me, and therefore, well, I will tell him he shall have what he asked." So she said to the frog, "Well, if you bring me my ball, I will do everything you ask." Thus the frog put his head down and dived deep, deep under the water, and after a little while he came up again with the ball in his mouth and threw it on the edge of the spring. As soon as the young princess saw her ball, she ran to pick it up, and she was so overjoyed to have it in her hand that she never even thought of the frog, but ran home with it as fast as she could. The frog called after her, "Princess, stay, stay, and take me with you as you said you would." But she did not stop. No, she did not stop to hear a word of it. The very next day, just as the princess had sat down to dinner, she heard a strange noise, as if something was coming up the marble staircase. And soon afterwards there was a gentle knock at the door, and a little voice cried out and said, "Open the door, my princess dear, open the door, to thy true love is here, and mind the words that thou and I said, by the fountain cool, in the greenwood shade." Then the princess ran to the door and opened it, and then she saw the frog, whom she had quite by this point well and truly forgotten. At this sight she was sadly frightened, and shutting the door as fast as she could, came back to her seat. The king, her father, seeing that something had indeed frightened her, asked her, "My daughter, what is the matter?" "Oh, there is a nasty frog at the door," said the princess. "One at the door that lifted my ball for me out of the spring this morning. I told him that he should live with me here, thinking that he could never get out of the spring anyway. But, there he is at the door, and, well, he wants to come in." While she was speaking, the frog knocked again at the door and said, "Open the door, my princess dear. Open the door to thy true love here, and mind the words that thou and I said by the fountain cool in the greenwood shade." Then the king said to the young princess, "Well, as you have given your word, you must keep it. So go on, let him in." So did she, and the frog hopped into the little room, and then straight on, tap, tap, from the bottom of the room to the top, until he came close to the table where the princess sat. "Pray lift me up upon the chair," said he to the princess, "and let me sit next to you." As soon as she had done this, the frog said, "Put your plate nearer to me, please, that I may eat out of it." This she did, and when he had eaten as much as he could, he said, "Now I am tired. Carry me upstairs and put me into your bed." And the princess, though quite unwilling, took him up in her little hands and put him upon the pillow of her own bed, where he slept all the night long. As soon as it was light, he jumped up, hopped downstairs, and went out of the house. "Oh, now then," thought the princess, "at last he is gone, and I shall be troubled with him no more." But the princess was sorely mistaken, for when night came she heard the same tapping at the door, and the frog came once more and said, "Open the door, my princess dear, open the door to thy true love here, and mind the words that thou and said by the cool fountain in the greenwood shade." And when the princess opened the door, the frog came in and slept upon her pillow as before till the morning broke. And the third night he did the same. But when the princess awoke on the following morning, she saw something that she did not expect. She was astonished to see that instead of a frog, there was a handsome prince, gazing upon her with the most beautiful eyes that she had ever seen, and standing at the head of the bed. He told her that he had been enchanted by a spiteful fairy, who had changed him into a frog, and that he had been fated so to abide till some princess should take him out of the spring, and let him eat from her plate, and sleep upon her bed for 3 nights. "You," said the prince, "have broken this cruel charm, and now I have nothing to wish for, but that you should go with me into my father's kingdom, where I will marry you, and love you as long as you live." The young princess, you may be sure, was not long in saying yes to all of this, and as they spoke a gay coach drove up, with 8 beautiful horses decked with plumes of feathers and a golden harness, and behind the coach rode the prince's servant, faithful Heinrich, who had bewailed the misfortunes of his dear master during this enchantment so long and so bitterly that his heart had well nigh burst. Then they took leave of the king, and got into the coach with 8 horses, and they all set out, full of joy and merriment, for the king's kingdom. And when they reached safely, there they lived happily for a great many, many years. The Tale of the Cat and Mouse in Partnership. Another story from the Brothers Grimm. A certain cat had made the fine acquaintance of a mouse, and had said so much to her about the great love and friendship she had felt for her, that at length the mouse agreed that they should live and keep house together. "But we must make provision for the winter, you know, or else we shall suffer from hunger," said the cat. "And you, little mouse, cannot venture everywhere, or, mark my words, you will be caught in a trap some day, I tell you." The good advice was well and truly followed, and a pot of fat was brought, but they did not know where to put it. At length, and after much consideration, the cat said, "I know no place where it will be better stored up than in the church, for no one dares take anything from the church. Thus we will set it beneath the altar, and do not touch it until we are really in need of it." So the pot was placed in safety. But it was not long before the cat had a great yearning for it, and said to the mouse, "I want to tell you something, little mouse. My cousin has brought a little son into the world, and has asked me to be godmother. He is white with brown spots, and I am to hold him over the font at the christening. Let me go out today, and you will look after the house by yourself." "Oh, yes, yes," answered the mouse. "By all means go, and if you get anything very good to eat, please do not forget me. I should like a drop of sweet red christening wine myself. Yes, yes." All this, however, was untrue. The cat did not have a cousin, and had not been asked to be godmother. She went straight to the church, stole the pot of fat, began to lick at it, and licked the top of the fat off. Then she took a walk upon the roofs of the town, looked out for opportunities, and stretched herself in the sun, and licked her lips whenever she thought of that pot of fat, and not until it was evening did she return home. "Well, well, here you are again," said the mouse. "No doubt you have had a merry day." "All went off well," answered the cat. "What did they name the child?" "Top off," said the cat, quite coolly. "Top off," cried the mouse. "That is a very odd and uncommon name. Is it a usual one with your family?" "What does that matter?" said the cat. "It's no worse than crumb stealer, as your godchildren are called." Before long the cat was seized by another fit of yearning. She said to the mouse, "You must do me a favor, and once more manage the house for a day alone. I am again asked to be godmother, and as the child has a white ring around its neck, I simply cannot refuse." The mouse consented, but the cat crept behind the town walls to the church, and devoured half the pot of fat. "Nothing ever seems so good as what one keeps to oneself," said she, and was quite satisfied with her day's work. When she went home, the mouse inquired, "And what was the child christened?" "Half done," answered the cat. "Half done? What are you saying? I have never heard a name like that in my life. I'll wager anything that it is not in the calendar." The cat's mouth soon began to water for some more licking. "All good things go in threes," she thought. "I am asked to stand godmother again, The child is quite black, only it has white paws, but with that exception it has not a single white hair on its whole body. This only happens once in every few years. It is very special. You will let me go, won't you?" "Top off, half done," answered the mouse. "They are such odd names. They make me very thoughtful." "You sit at home," said the cat, "in your dark grey fur coat and long tail, and are filled with fancies. That's because you don't go out in the daytime." During the cat's absence, the mouse cleaned the house and put it in order. But it was this day that the greedy cat entirely emptied the pot of fat. When everything was eaten up, "One has some peace," she said to herself. And well filled and fat, she did not return home till nightfall. The mouse at once asked what name had been given to the third child. "Well, it will not please you more than the others did," said the cat. "He is called All Gone." "All Gone," said the mouse. "Now that is the most suspicious name of all. I have never seen it in print. All Gone? What can that mean?" She shook her head, curled herself up, and lay down to sleep. From this time forth, no one invited the cat to be godmother. But when the winter had come, there was no longer anything to be found outside. The mouse thought of their provision and said, "Come, cat, we will go to our pot of fat which we have stored up for ourselves. We shall enjoy that." "Yes," answered the cat, "you will enjoy it as much as you would enjoy sticking that dainty tongue of yours out the window." They set out on their way, but when they arrived, the pot of fat was certainly still in its place, but there was no fat inside. It was completely empty. "Oh," said the mouse, "now I see what has happened. Now it comes to light. You are indeed a true friend. You have devoured all when you were standing godmother. First top off, then half done, then—" "Will you hold your tongue?" cried the cat. "One more word and I will eat you as well." All gone. It was already on the poor mouse's lips. Scarcely had she spoken it before the cat sprang upon her, seized her, and swallowed her down. Truly, that is the way of the world. The Goose Girl. The king of a great land had died, and left his queen to take care of their only child. The child was a daughter, who was very beautiful, and her mother loved her so dearly, and was very kind to her. And there was a good fairy, too, who was fond of the princess, and helped her mother watch over her. When she grew up, she was betrothed to a prince who lived a great way off, and as the time grew near for her to be married, she got ready to set off on the journey to his country. Then the queen, her mother, packed a great many costly things, jewels, gold, silver trinkets, fine dresses, and, in short, everything that became a royal bride. And she gave her waiting maid to ride with her, and give her into the bridegroom's hands, and each had a horse for the journey. Now the princess's horse was the fairy's gifts, and it was called Falada, and this horse could even speak. When the time came for them to set out, the fairy went into her bedchamber and took a little knife and cut a lock of her hair. She gave it to the princess and said, "Take care of it, dear child, for it is a charm that may be of use to you on the road." Then they all took a sorrowful leave of the princess, and she put the lock of hair into her bosom, got upon her horse, and set on the journey to her bridegroom's kingdom. One day, as they were riding along by a brook, the princess began to feel very thirsty, and she said to her maid, "Pray get down and fetch me some water in my golden cup out of the yonder brook, for I want to drink." "Nay," said the maid, "if you are thirsty, get off yourself and stoop down by the water and drink. I shall not be your waiting maid any longer." Then she was so thirsty that she got down and knelt over a little brook and drank, for she was frightened and dared not bring out her golden cup. And she wept and said, "Oh, what will become of me?" And the lock answered her and said, "Alas, alas, if thy mother knew it, sadly, sadly would she rue it." But the princess was very gentle and meek, so she said nothing to her maid's ill behavior, but got up upon her horse again. Then all rode farther upon their journey, till the day grew so warm and the sun so scorching that the bride began to feel very thirsty again, and at last, when they came to a river, she forgot her maid's rude speech and said, "Pray get down and fetch me some water to drink in my golden cup." But the maid answered her, and even spoke more harshly than before, "Drink if you will, but I shall not be your waiting maid." Then the princess was so thirsty that she got off her horse and lay down and held her head over the running stream, and she cried and said, "What will become of me?" And the lock of hair answered her again, "Alas, alas, if thy mother knew it, sadly, sadly would she rue it." And as she leaned down to drink, the lock of hair fell from her bosom and floated away with the water. Now she was so frightened that she did not see it, but her maid saw it and was very glad, for she knew the charm, and she saw the poor bride would be in her power now that she had lost the lock of hair. So, when the bride had done drinking and would have gotten upon Falada again, the maid said, "I shall ride upon Falada, and you may have my horse instead." So she was forced to give up her horse, and soon afterwards to take off her royal clothes and put on the maid's shabby ones. At last, as they drew near to the end of their journey, this treacherous servant threatened to kill the princess if she ever told anyone what happened. But Falada saw it all, and marked it well. Then the waiting maid got upon Falada, and the real bride rode upon the other horse, and they went on in this way till at last they came to the royal court. There was great joy at their coming, and the prince flew to meet him, and lifted the maid from her horse, thinking she was the one who was to be his wife, and she was led upstairs into the royal chamber, but the true princess was told to stay in the court below. Now, the old king happened just then to have nothing else to do, so he amused himself by sitting at his kitchen window, looking at what was going on, and he saw her down there in the courtyard. As she looked very pretty and too delicate for a waiting maid, he went up into the royal chamber to ask the bride who it was she had brought with her, that was thus left standing in the court below all alone. "I brought her with me for the sake of company on the road," she said. "Pray give the girl some work to do, that she may not be idle." The old king could not for some time think of any work for her to do, but at last he said, "I do have a lad who takes care of my geese. She may go and help him." Now the name of this lad that the real bride was to help in the king's geese was Curdken. But the false bride said to the prince, "Dear husband, pray do me one piece of kindness." "That I will," said the prince. "Then tell one of your slaughterers to cut off the head of the horse I rode upon, for it was very unruly, and plagued me sadly on the road." But the truth was this: she was very much afraid lest Falada should some day or another speak and tell of all she had done to the princess. She carried her point, and the faithful Falada was killed. But when the true princess heard of it, she wept and begged the man to nail up Falada's head against a large dark gate of the city, through which she had to pass every morning and evening, that there she might still see him sometimes. Then the slaughterer said that he would do as she wished, and cut off the head and nailed it up under the dark gate. Early the next morning, as she and Curdken went out through the gate, she said sorrowfully, "Falada, Falada, there thou hangest." And the head answered, "Bride, bride, there thou gangest. Alas, alas, if thy mother knew it, sadly, sadly would she rue it." Then they went out of the city, and drove the geese on. And when she came to the meadow, she sat upon a bank there, and let down her waving locks of hair, which were all of pure silver. And when Curdken saw it glitter in the sun, he ran up, and would have pulled some locks of it, but she cried, "Blow, breezes, blow, let Curdken's hat go. Blow, breezes, blow, let him after it go. Over hills, dales, and rocks away be it whirled, till the silvery locks all are combed and curled." Then there came a wind, so strong that it blew off Curdken's hat, and away it flew over the hills, and she was forced to turn and run after it, till by the time he came back she had done combing and curling her hair, and put it up again safe. Oh, there he was very angry and sulky, and would not speak to her at all. But they watched the geese until it grew dark in the evening, and then drove them homewards. The next morning, as they went through the dark gate, the poor girl looked up at Falada's head, and cried, "Falada, Falada, there thou hangest." And the head answered, "Bride, bride, there thou gangest. Alas, alas, if thy mother knew it, sadly, sadly would she rue it." Then she drove on the geese, and sat down again in the meadow, and began to comb her hair as before, and Curdken, wanting to take hold of it, ran up to her, but she cried out quickly, blow, breezes, blow, let Curdken's hat go. Blow, breezes, blow, let him after it go, over hills, dales, and rocks, away it be whirled, till the silvery locks are all combed and curled. Then the wind came and blew away his hat, and off it flew a great distance over the hills and far away, so that he had to run after it. And when he came back, she had bound up her hair again and was all safe. So they watched the geese until it grew dark. In the evening, after they came home, Curdken went to the old king and said, "I cannot have this strange girl to help me keep the geese any longer." "Why?" said the king. "Because instead of doing any good, she does nothing but tease me all day long. I can't stand it." Then the king made him tell him what had happened, and Curdken said, "When we go in the morning through the dark gate with our flock of geese, she cries and talks with the head of a horse that hangs upon the wall, and says, 'Falada, Falada, there thou hangest.' And the head answers, 'Bride, bride, there thou gangest. Alas, alas, if thy mother knew it, sadly, sadly she would rue it.'" And Curdken went on telling the king what had happened upon the meadow where the geese fed, how his hat had blown away, and how he was forced to run after it, and to leave his flock of geese to themselves. But the old king told the boy to go out again the next day, and when the morning came, he placed himself behind the dark gate, and heard how she spoke to Falada, and even how Falada answered. Then he went into the field, and hid himself in a bush by the meadow's side, and he soon saw with his own eyes how they drove the flock of geese, and how after a little time she sat down her hair that glittered in the sun, and he heard her say the poem, and soon came a gale of wind and carried away Curdken's hat, and away went Curdken after it, while the girl went on combing and curling her long hair. All this the old king saw. So he went home without being seen, and when the little Goose Girl came back in the evening, he called her aside, and asked her why she did so. But she burst into tears, and she said, "That I must not tell you or any man, or I shall lose my life." But the old king persisted. He begged so hard that she had no peace till she had told him all the tale, from beginning to end, word for word. And it was very lucky for her that she did so, for when she had done so, the king ordered royal clothes to be put upon her, and gazed upon her with wonder, for she was so beautiful. Then he called his son, and told him he had only a false bride, for that she was merely a waiting maid, while the true bride stood by. And the young king rejoiced when he saw her beauty, and heard how meek and patient she had been, and without saying anything to the false bride, the king ordered a great feast to be got ready for all his court. The bridegroom sat at the top, with the false princess on one side and the true on the other. But nobody knew her again, for her beauty was quite dazzling to their eyes, and she did not seem at all like that little Goose Girl, now that she had her brilliant dress on. When they had eaten and drank, and were very merry, the old king said that he would tell them a tale. So he began, and told all of the stories of the princess, as if it were one that he had once heard long ago, and asked the true waiting maid what she thought ought to be done to anybody who would behave like this. "Nothing better," said the false bride, "that she should be thrown into a cask stuck round with sharp nails, and that 2 white horses should be put to it, and should drag it from street to street until she is dead." "Thou art she," said the old king, "and as thou hast judged thyself, so shall it be done to thee." And the young king was then married to his true wife, and they reigned over the kingdom in peace and happiness all their lives. And the good fairy came to see them, and finally restored that faithful horse Falada to life again. The Adventures of the Chanticleer and Partlet. 1. How they went to the mountains to eat nuts. "The nuts are quite ripe now," said Chanticleer to his wife Partlet. "Suppose we go together to the mountains and eat as many as we can before those squirrels take them away." "With all my heart," said Partlet. "Let us go. Hey, let's make a holiday of it together." And so they went into the mountains, and as it was a lovely day, they stayed there till evening. Now, whether it was that they had eaten so many nuts that they could not walk, or whether they were simply lazy and would not, I cannot tell you for sure. However, they took it into their heads that it did not become them to go home on foot. So the Chanticleer began to build a little carriage of nutshells, and when it was finished, Partlet jumped into it and sat down, and bid Chanticleer harness himself to it and draw her home. Now that's a good joke," said Chanticleer. "No, that will never do. I had rather by half walk home. I'll sit on the box and be the coachman, if you like, but I'll not draw." While this was passing, a duck came quacking up and cried out, "You thieving vagabonds! What business have you in my grounds? I'll give it to you well and good for your insolence." And upon that she fell upon the Chanticleer most lustily. But Chanticleer was no coward, not at all, and returned the duck's blows with his sharp spurs so fiercely that she soon began to cry out for mercy, which was only granted upon her condition that she would draw the carriage home for them. This she agreed to do, and Chanticleer got up on the box and drove, crying out, "Now, duck, get on as fast as you can." And away they went, and at a pretty good pace. After they had travelled along a little way, they met a needle and pin walking together along the road, and the needle cried out, "Stop, stop," and said it was so dark that they could hardly find their way, and such dirty walking, while they could not get on at all. He told them that he and his friend the pin had been at a public house a few miles off, and had sat drinking till they had forgotten how late in the evening it was. He begged, therefore, that the travellers would be so kind as to give them a lift in their carriage. Chanticleer, observing that they were but thin fellows, and not likely to take up much room, told them that they might ride, but made them promise not to dirty the wheels of the carriage in getting onto it, nor to tread on Partlet's toes. Late at night, they arrived at an inn, and it was bad travelling in the dark, of course. The duck seemed much tired, and waddled about a good deal from one side to another. They eventually made up their minds to fix their quarters there. But you see, the landlord at first was unwilling, and said that there was no vacancy, thinking that they might not be very respectable company. However, they did speak civilly to him, and gave him the egg which Partlet had laid by the way, and said they would come give him the duck, who was in habit of laying one every single day. Well, at last he let them come on in, and they bespoke a handsome supper, and spent the evening very joyously. Early in the morning, before it was quite light, and when nobody was stirring in the inn, Chanticleer awakened his wife, and fetching the egg, they pecked a hole in it, ate it up, and threw the shells into the fireplace. They then went to the pin and needle, who were fast asleep, and seizing them by the heads, struck one into the landlord's easy chair, and the other into his handkerchief. And after having done this, they crept away as softly as possible. However, the duck, who slept in the open air of the yard, heard them coming, and jumped into the brook which ran close by the inn, soon swam out of their reach. An hour or two afterwards the landlord got up, and took his handkerchief to wipe his face, but the pin ran into him and pricked him. Then he walked into his kitchen to light his pipe at the fire, but when he stirred it up, the eggshells flew into his eyes, and almost blinded him. "Bless me," said him, "all the world seems to have a design against my head this morning." And so saying, he threw himself sulkily into his easy chair. But, oh dear, the needle ran into him, and this time the pain was not in his head. He flew into a very great passion, but suspecting the company who had come in the night before, he went to look after them, but they were all off, so he swore never again would he take in such a troop of vagabonds, who ate a great deal, paid no reckoning, and gave him nothing for his trouble but their apish and rude tricks. 2. How Chanticleer and Partlet went to visit Mr. Korbes. There was another day. Chanticleer and Partlet wished to ride out together. So Chanticleer built a handsome carriage, with 4 red wheels, harnessing 6 mice to it. And then he and Partlet got into the carriage, and away they drove. Soon afterwards, a cat met them, and said, "Where are you going?" Chanticleer replied, "All on our way, a visit to pay to Mr. Korbes the fox today." Then the cat said, "Oh, please, take me with you." Chanticleer said, "Well, with all my heart. Get up behind then, and be sure that you do not fall off, will you? Take this handsome coach of mine, nor dirty my pretty red wheels so fine. Now, mice, be ready, and wheels run steady, for we are going to a visit to pay to Mr. Korbes the fox today." Soon after came up a millstone, an egg, a duck, and a pin, and Chanticleer gave them all leave to get up into the carriage and go with them. When they arrived at Mr. Korb's house, he seemed to not be at home. So the mice drew the carriage into the coach-house. Chanticleer and Partlet flew up upon the beam. The cat sat down in the fireplace. The duck got into the washing cistern, and the pin stuck himself into a bed-pillow. The millstone laid himself over the house door, and the egg rolled himself up nicely into a little towel. When Mr. Korbes came home, he went to the fireplace, but the cat threw all the ashes in his eyes, so he ran to the kitchen to watch himself, but there a duck splashed all the water in his face, and when he tried to wipe himself, the egg broke to pieces in the towel, all over his face and eyes. Oh, then he was very angry, and went without his supper to bed. But when he laid his head on the pillow, oh, the pin ran into his cheek, and he became quite furious, and jumping up and jumping down, would have ran out of the house. But when he came to the door, the millstone fell down upon his head, and Mr. Korbes was killed on the spot. 3. How Partlet died and was buried, and how Chanticleer died of grief. There was another day. Chanticleer and Partlet agreed to go again to the mountains to eat nuts, and it was settled that all the nuts which they found should be shared equally between them. Now Partlet found a very large one indeed, but she said nothing about it to Chanticleer, and kept it all to herself. Oh, however, it was so big that she simply could not swallow it, and it stuck in her little throat. Then she was in a great fright, and she cried out to Chanticleer, "Pray run as fast as you can and fetch me some water, or I shall be choked." Chanticleer ran as fast as he could to the river, and said, "River, river, give me some water, for Partlet lies in the mountains, and will be choked by a great nut." The river said, "Run first to the bride, and ask her for a silken cord to draw up the water." Chanticleer ran to the bride and said, "Bride, you must give me a silken cord, for then the river will give me water, and the water I will carry to Partlet, who lies on the mountain and will be choked by a great nut." But the bride said, "Run first, and bring me my garland that is hanging on a willow in the garden." Then Chanticleer ran to the garden, and took the garland from the bough where it hung, and brought it to the bride, and the bride gave him the silken cord, and he took the silken cord to the river, and the river gave him water, and he carried the water to Partlet. But in the meantime, she was choked, and lay quite dead, and never moved any more. Oh, Chanticleer! He was so sorry, and he cried bitterly, and all the beasts came and wept with him over poor, poor Partlet. And the 6 mice, they helped too. They built a little hearse to carry her to her grave, and when it was ready, they harnessed themselves before it, and Chanticleer drove them. On the way they met the fox. "Where are you going, Chanticleer?" said he. "To bury my Partlet," said the other. "May I go with you?" said the fox. "Yes, but you must get up behind, or my horses will simply not be able to draw you." Then the fox got up behind, and presently the wolf, the bear, the goat, and all the beasts of the wood came and climbed upon the hearse, So they went until they came to a rapid stream. How shall we get over this? Said Chanticleer. Then said a straw, I will lay myself across, and you may pass over upon me. But as the mice were going over, the straw slipped away and fell into the water, and all the 6 mice fell in, and all the 6 mice were drowned. What was to be done? Then a large log of wood came and said, I am big enough. I will lay myself across the stream, and you shall pass over upon me. So he laid himself down, but they managed so clumsily, so ever so clumsily, that the log of wood fell in and was carried away by the stream. But then a stone, who saw what had happened, came up and kindly offered to help poor Chanticleer by laying himself across the stream. And this time he got safely to the other side with the hearse, and managed to get Partlet out of it. But the fox and the other mourners, who were sitting behind, were too heavy, and fell back into the water, and were all carried away by the stream and drowned. Thus Chanticleer was left all alone with his dead Partlet, and having dug a grave for her, he laid her in it, and he made a little hillock over her, and then he sat down by the grave. He wept, he mourned, till at last he was dead too. And so all were dead. The Tale of Rapunzel. I'm sure you know this one. There were once a man and a woman who had long in vain wished for a child. At length the woman hoped that God was about to grant her desire. These people had a little window at the back of their house, from which a splendid garden could be observed, which was full of the most beautiful flowers and sweetest of herbs. But it was, however, surrounded by a high wall, and no one dared to go into it, because it belonged to an enchantress, who had great powers and was dreaded by all the world. One day, the woman was standing by this window and looking down into the garden, when she saw a bed which was planted with the most beautiful rampion, or, as it's also known, Rapunzel. And, while it looked simply so fresh and green, she could not help but long for it. See, she quite pined away, and began to look pale and miserable. But then her husband was alarmed, and asked her, "What ails you, my dear wife?" "Oh," she replied, "if I can't eat some of the rampion, which is in the garden behind our house, well, I think I shall die." The man who loved her so dearly thought, "Sooner than let your wife die, bring her some of the rampion yourself. Let it cost whatever it will." So, at twilight, he clambered down the wall into the garden of the feared enchantress, hastily clutched a handful of rampion, and took it to his dearly beloved wife. And she at once made herself a delicious salad from it, and ate it so greedily. It tasted so good to her, so very good, that the next day she longed for it again, but this time 3 times as much as before. If he was to have any rest, her husband must once more descend into the garden. In the gloom of the evening, therefore, he let himself down again. But when he had clambered down the wall, he was terribly afraid, for he saw standing before him the very enchantress he feared. "How can you dare," she said with an angry look, "descend into my garden and steal my rampion like a thief? You shall suffer for it." "Oh," answered he, "let mercy take place of justice. I only made up my mind to do it out of necessity, you see. My wife saw your rampion out the window, and felt such a longing that she would have died. Oh, she would have died if I had not gone and got some for her." It was then that the enchantress allowed her anger to be somewhat softened, and said to him, "Well, if the case be exactly as you say, then indeed I will allow you to take away with you as much rampion as you will. Only I make one condition, that you must give me the child which your wife will bring into the world. Don't worry, it shall be well treated, and I will care for it as if I were its own mother." The man, in its terror, he consented to everything. He had no choice. And when the woman was brought to bed, the enchantress appeared at once, gave the child the name of Rapunzel, and took it away with her. Rapunzel grew into the most beautiful child under the sun. When she was 12 years old, the enchantress shut her into a tower, which lay in a forest, and had neither stairs nor door, but quite at the top was a dainty little window. When the enchantress wanted to go in, she placed herself beneath it and cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair to me." Rapunzel, you see, had magnificent long hair, fine as spun gold, and when she heard the voice of the enchantress, she unfastened her braided tresses, wound them round one of the hooks of the window above, and then when the hair fell 20 ells down, the enchantress climbed up upon it. After a year or two, it so came to pass that the king's son rode through the forest and passed by the tower. It was then that he heard a song, a beautiful song, which was so charming that he stopped, stood still, and listened. This was Rapunzel, who in her solitude, in her loneliness, passed her endless time in letting her sweet voice resound. The king's son wanted to climb up to her, and looked for the door of the tower, but to his surprise there was no door to be found. Thus he rode home, but the singing had so deeply touched his heart that every day he went out into the forest and listened to it. Once, when he was thus standing behind a tree, he saw that an enchantress came there, and heard how she cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair to me." Then Rapunzel let down the braids of her hair, and the enchantress climbed up to her. "If that is the ladder by which one mounts, I too will try my fortune," said he. And the very next day, when it began to grow dark, he went to the tower and he cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair to me." To his surprise, the hair immediately fell down, and the king's son climbed up. At first, Rapunzel was terribly frightened when a man, such as her eyes had never beheld, came to her. But the king's son began to talk to her quite like a friend, and told her that his heart had been so stirred that it gave him no rest, and he had simply been forced to see her. It was then Rapunzel lost her fear, and when he asked her if she would take him for her husband, and she saw that he was young and handsome, she thought, "Oh, he will love me more than the old Dame Gothel does." So she said yes, and laid her hand in his. She said, "I will willingly go away with you, but I do not know how to get down. Bring with you a skein of silk every time that you come, and I will weave a ladder with it, and when that is ready I will descend, and you will take me upon your horse." They agreed that until the time he shall come to her every evening, for the old woman came by day. The enchantress remarked nothing of this, until once Rapunzel said to her, "Tell me, Dame Gothel, how it happens that you are so much heavier for me to draw up than the young king's son. He is with me in a moment." "Ah, you wicked child," cried the enchantress. "What do I hear you say? I thought I had separated you from all the world, and yet you have deceived me." In her anger, she clutched Rapunzel's beautiful hair, wrapped it round twice her left hand, seized a pair of scissors with the right, and snip, snap, it was all cut off. And then the lovely braids lay on the ground. She was so pitiless that she took poor Rapunzel into a desert where she had to live in grief, misery, and loneliness. On the same day that she cast out Rapunzel, however, the enchantress fastened the braids of hair which she had cut off to the hook of the window, and when the king's son came, he cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair to me." She let the hair down. The king's son ascended, but instead of finding his dearest Rapunzel, he found the enchantress, who gazed at him with a wicked and venomous look. "Aha!" she cried mockingly. "You would fetch your dearest, but the beautiful bird sits no longer singing in the nest. The cat has got it, and it will scratch your eyes out as well. Rapunzel is lost to you. You will never see her again." The king's son was beside himself with pain, and in his despair he leapt down from the tower. He escaped with his life, but the thorns into which he fell pierced his eyes. Then he wandered, blind, about the forest, ate nothing but roots and berries, and did naught but lament and weep over the loss of his dearest Rapunzel. Thus he roamed about in misery for some years, and at length came to the desert, where Rapunzel, with the twins to which they had given birth, a boy and a girl, lived in wretchedness. He heard a voice, and it seemed so familiar to him that he went towards it. And when he approached, Rapunzel knew him and fell upon him and wept. 2 of her tears wetted his eyes, and they grew clear again, and he could see with them as he did before. He led her to his kingdom, where he was joyfully welcomed, and they lived for a long time afterwards, happy and content. The Tale of Fundevogel. There was once a forester who went into the forest to hunt, and as he entered it, he heard the sound of screaming, as if a little child were there. He followed the sound, and at last came to a high tree, and at the top of this, indeed, a little child was sitting, for the mother had fallen asleep under the tree with the child, and a bird of prey had seen it in her arms, flown down, snatched it away, and set it upon the high tree. The forester climbed up, brought the child down, and thought to himself, "You will take him home with you, and bring him up with your Lena." He took it home, and the 2 children grew up together. And the one which he had found on the tree was called Fundevogel, because a bird had carried it away. Fundevogel and Lena loved each other so dearly that when they did not see each other, they were so terribly sad. Now the forester had an old cook, who one evening took 2 pails and began to fetch water, and did not only go once, but many times out of this spring. Lena saw this and said, "Listen, old Sana, why are you fetching so much water? If you will never repeat it to anyone, I will tell you why." So Lena said, no, she would never repeat it to anyone. And then the cook said, "Early tomorrow morning, when the forester is out hunting, I will heat the water, and when it is boiling in the kettle, I will throw in Fundevogel, and will boil him in it." Early the next morning, the forester got up and went out hunting, and when he was gone, the children were still in bed. Then Lena said to Fundevogel, "If you will never leave me, I too will never leave you." Fundevogel said, "Neither now nor ever will I leave you." Then said Lena, "Then will I tell you, last night old Sana carried so many buckets of water into the house, and I asked her why was she doing that, and she said that if I would promise not to tell anyone, and she said that early tomorrow morning, when father was out hunting, she would set the kettle full of water, throw you into it, and boil you. But we will get up quickly, dress ourselves, and we will go away together." The 2 children, therefore, got up. They dressed themselves quickly, and they went away. When the water in the kettle was boiling, the cook went in the bedroom to fetch Fundevogel and throw him into it. But when she came in and went to the beds, both of the children were gone. And then she was terribly alarmed, and said to herself, "Oh, what shall I say when the forester comes home and sees that the children are gone? They must be followed instantly to get them back again." Then the cook sent 3 servants after them, who were to run as fast as they could and overtake the children. The children, however, were sitting outside the forest, and when they saw from afar these servants running, Lena said to Fundevogel, never leave me, and I will never leave you." Fundevogel said, "Neither now nor ever." Then said Lena, "Do you become a rose tree, and I the rose upon it." When the 3 servants came to the forest, nothing was there but a rose tree and a rose on it, but the children were nowhere to be found. Then they said, "There is nothing to be done here," and they went home and told the cook that they had seen nothing in the forest but a little rose bush with a rose upon it. The old cook, she was angry. "You simpletons, you should have cut the rose bush in 2 and have broken off the rose and brought it home with you. Go and do it at once." They had therefore to go out and look for a second time. The children, however, saw them coming from a distance. Then Lena said, "Fundevogel, never leave me, and I will never leave you." Fundevogel said, "Neither now nor ever." Lena said, "Then do you become a church, and I the chandelier in it." So when the 3 servants came, there was nothing but a church with a chandelier in it. They said therefore to each other, "Well, what can we do here? Let's go home." When they got home, the cook asked if they had not found them. So they said no, they'd found nothing but a church, and there was a chandelier in it. And the cook scolded them and said, "You fools, why did you not pull the church to pieces and bring the chandelier home with you?" And now the old cook herself got on her legs, and went with the 3 servants in pursuit of the children. However, the children once again saw them from afar, and the 3 servants were coming, and this time the cook was waddling after them. Then said Lena, "Fundevogel, never leave me, and I will never leave you." "Neither now nor ever," said Fundevogel. Lena said, "Be a fish pond, and I will be a duck upon it." The cook, however, came up to them, and when she saw the pond she lay down by it, and was about to drink it up. But the duck quickly swam to her, seized her head in its beak, and drew her down into the water. And there the old witch drowned. Then the children went home together, and were heartily delighted, and, well, if they had not died, they must be living still, together, always. The Tale of the Valiant Little Tailor. One summer's morning, a little tailor was sitting on his table by the window. He was in good spirits as usual, and sewed with all his might. Then came a peasant woman down the street, crying out, "Good jams, cheap! Good jams, cheap!" This rang pleasantly in the tailor's ears. He stretched his delicate head out the window and called, "Come up here, dear woman. Here you will get rid of your goods quite quickly." The woman came up the 3 steps to the tailor with her heavy basket, and he made her unpack all the pots for him. He inspected each one, lifted it up, put his nose to it, and at length said to her, "Well, the jam seems to me to be good enough. So weigh me out 4 ounces, dear woman, and if it is a 1/4 of a pound, that is of no consequence." The woman, who had hoped to find a good sale, gave him what he desired, but went away quite angry and grumbling. "Now this jam shall be blessed by God," cried the little tailor, "and give me health and strength." So he brought the bread out of the cupboard, cut himself a piece right across the loaf, and spread the jam over it. "This will not taste bitter," said he, "but I will just finish the jacket before I take a bite." He laid the bread near him, sewed on, and in his joy made bigger and bigger stitches. In the meantime, the smell of the sweet jam rose to where the flies were sitting in great numbers, and they were attracted and descended on it in hosts. "Hi, who invited you?" said the little tailor, and drove the unbidden guests away. But the flies, however, who understood no German, would not be turned away, but came back again in ever-increasing companies. The little tailor had lost all of his patience, and drew a piece of cloth from the hole under his work-table, saying, "Wait, and I will give it to you," struck it mercilessly on them. When he drew it away and counted, there lay before him no fewer than 7, dead, and with legs stretched out in all directions. "Are you a fellow of that sort?" said he, and could not help admiring his own bravery. "This whole town shall know of this," and the little tailor hastened to cut himself a girdle, stitched it, and embroidered it in large letters, 7 at 1 stroke. "What, the town," he continued, "the whole world shall hear of this." And his heart wagged with joy like a little tail of a lamb. The tailor put on the girdle and resolved to go forth into the world, because he thought that this little workshop was indeed far too small for his valor, far too small for his bravery. Before he went away, he sought about it in the house to see if there was anything which he could take with him. However, he found nothing but an old cheese, and he put that in his pocket. In front of the door he observed a bird which had caught itself in a thicket. It had to go in his pocket with the cheese, of course. Now he took to the road boldly, and as he was light and nimble, he felt very little fatigue. The road led him up a mountain, and when he had reached the highest point of it, there sat a powerful giant, peacefully looking down about him. The little tailor went up bravely, spoke to him, and said, "Good day, friend. So, you are sitting there overlooking the widespread world. I am just on my way thither, and want to try my luck. Have you any inclination to go with me?" The giant looked contemptuously at the tailor, and said, "You ragamuffin, you miserable creature." "Oh, indeed," answered the little tailor, and unbuttoned his coat, and showed the giant girdle. "There you may read what kind of man I am." The giant looked a little closer and read, 7 at 1 stroke, and thought that they had been men whom the tailor had killed, and began to feel a little respect for the tiny fellow at this point. Nevertheless, he wished to try him first, and took a stone in his hand and squeezed it together so that water dropped out of it. "Do that likewise," said the giant, "if you have the strength." "Is that all?" said the tailor. "That is child's play with us," and put his hand into his pocket, brought out the soft cheese, and pressed it till the liquid ran out of it. "Faith," said he, "that was a little better, wasn't it?" The giant was at a loss for words. He could not believe it of the little man. Then the giant picked up a stone and threw it so high that the eye could scarcely keep up with it. "Now, little mouse of a man, do that likewise." The tailor replied, "Well thrown, giant, but after all, the stone came down to earth again. I will throw you one which shall never come back at all." And he put his hand into his pocket, took out the bird, and threw it into the air. The bird was delighted with its newfound liberty, rose, flew away, and never came back. "How does that shot please you, friend?" asked the tailor. "Well, you can certainly throw," said the giant, "but now we will see if you are able to carry anything properly." He took the little tailor to a mighty oak tree, which lay there felled on the ground, and he said, "If you are strong enough, help me to carry the tree out of the forest." "Readily," answered the little man. "Take you the trunk on your shoulders, and I will raise up the branches and twigs. After all, they are the heaviest." The giant took the trunk on his shoulder, but the tailor seated himself on a branch, and the giant, who could not look around, had to carry the whole tree, and the little tailor as well into the bargain. He behind was quite merry and happy, and whistled the song, "Three tailors rode forth from the gate," as if carrying the tree was child's play. The giant, after he had dragged the heavy burden part of the way, could simply go no further, and he cried, hark you, I shall have to let the tree fall now." The tailor sprang nimbly down, seized the tree with both arms as if he had been carrying it, and said to the giant, "You are such a great fellow, and yet cannot even carry the tree." They went on together, and they passed a cherry tree. The giant laid hold of the top of the tree where the ripest fruit was hanging, bent it down, gave it into the tailor's hand, and bade him to eat. But the tailor was much too weak to hold the tree, and when the giant let it go, it sprang back up again, and the tailor was tossed into the air with it. When he had fallen down again without injury, the giant said, "What is this? Have you not strength enough to hold the weak twig?" "There is no lack of strength," answered the little tailor. "Do you think that could be anything to a man who has struck down 7 at one blow? I leapt over the tree because the huntsmen are shooting down there in the thicket. Jump as I did, if you can do it." The giant made the attempt, but he could not get over the tree, and remained hanging in the branches, so that also the tailor kept the upper hand in this way. The giant said, "If you are such a valiant fellow, come with me into our cavern and spend the night with us." The little tailor was willing, and followed him. When they went into the cave, other giants were sitting there by the fire, and each of them had roasted a sheep in his hand and was eating it. The little tailor looked around and thought, it is indeed much more spacious here than in my cramped little workshop." The giant showed him a bed, and he said he was to lie down in it and sleep. But the bed was indeed far too big for the little tailor. He did not lie down in it, but rather crept into a corner. When it was midnight, and the giant thought the little tailor was lying in a sound sleep, he got up, took a great iron bar, cut through the bed with one blow, and thought he had finished off the grasshopper for good. With the earliest dawn, the giants went into the forest, and had quite forgotten the little tailor. when all at once he walked up to them quite merrily and boldly. The giants were terrified. They were afraid that he would strike them all dead, and they all ran away in a great hurry. The little tailor went onwards, always following his pointed nose. After he had walked for a long time, he came to the courtyard of a royal palace, and as he felt so tired, he lay down upon the grass and drifted away to sleep. Whilst he lay there, the people came and inspected him on all sides, and read on his girdle, 7 at one stroke. "Ah," said they, "what does the great warrior want here in the midst of peace? He must be a mighty lord." They went and denounced him to the king, and gave it as their opinion that if war should break out, heaven forbid, this would be a weighty and useful man, who ought on no account be allowed to depart. The counsel pleased the king, and he sent one of the courtiers to the little tailor, and offered him military service when he awoke. The ambassador remained standing by the sleeper, waited until he stretched his limbs and opened his eyes, and then conveyed to him his proposal. "For this very reason I have come here," the tailor replied. "I am quite ready to enter the king's service." He was therefore honorably received, and a special dwelling was assigned to him. The soldiers, however, were set against the little tailor, and wished him 1,000 miles away. "What is to be the end of this?" they said among themselves. "If we quarrel with him, and if he strikes about him, 7 of us will fall at every blow. Not one of us can stand against him." They came therefore to a decision, betook themselves in a body to the king, and begged for their dismissal. "We are not prepared," they said, "to stay with a man who kills 7 at one stroke." The king was sorry that for the sake of one he should lose all of his faithful servants, and he wished he had never set eyes upon the tailor, and would willingly have been rid of him again. But he did not venture to give him his dismissal, for he dreaded lest he should strike him and all his people dead, and place himself as the new king on the throne. He thought about it for a good time, and at last he found good counsel. He sent to the little tailor, and caused him to be informed that he was a great warrior, and he had one request to make of him. In a forest of his country lived 2 giants, both of which caused great mischief with their robbing, murdering, ravaging, and burning, and no one could approach them without putting himself in danger of death. If the tailor conquered and killed these 2 giants, he would give him his only daughter to wed, and half of his kingdom as a dowry. Likewise, 100 horsemen should go with him to assist. "That would indeed be a fine thing for a man like me," thought the little tailor. "One is not offered a beautiful princess, and half a kingdom every day of one's life." "Oh yes," he replied, "I will soon subdue the giants, and do not require the help of 100 horsemen to do it. He who can hit 7 with one blow has no need to be afraid of 2. And thus the little tailor went forth, and the 100 horsemen followed him. But when he came to the outskirts of the forest, he said to his followers, "You just stay waiting here. I alone will finish off the giants." Then he bounded into the forest, and looked about right and left. After a while, he saw them both. They lay sleeping under a tree, and snored so that the branches waved up and the branches waved down and to and fro and left and right. The little tailor, not idle, gathered 2 pocketsfuls of stones, and with these he climbed up the tree. When he was halfway up, he slipped down by a branch until he sat just above the sleeping giants, and then let one stone after another fall upon the breast of them. For a long time the giant felt nothing, but at last he awoke, pushed his friend, and said, "Why are you knocking me?" "You must be dreaming," said the other. "I am not knocking you at all." They laid themselves down to sleep again, and then the tailor threw a stone down at the second. "What is the meaning of this?" cried the other. "Why are you pelting me?" "I am not pelting you," answered the first, growling in anger. They argued about it for quite some time, but as they were weary, they finally let the matter rest, and their eyes closed once more. The little tailor began his game again, picked out the biggest of the stones, and threw it with all of his might upon the breast of the first giant. "That is too much," cried he, and sprung up like a madman, and pushed his companion against the tree until it shook. The other paid him back in the same coin, and they got into such a rage that they tore up trees and belaboured each other so long that at last they both fell down dead on the ground at the same time. Then the little tailor leapt down. "It is a lucky thing," said he, "that they did not tear up the tree on which I was sitting, or I shall have had to sprint on to another like a squirrel. But you know, we tailors are ever so nimble." He drew out his sword and gave each of them a couple of thrusts in the chest, and then he went out to the horsemen and said, "The work is done. I have finished both of them off. But I must say it was a bit of hard work." They tore up the trees in their sore need and defended themselves with them. But of course, all that is to no purpose when a man like myself comes along, who can kill 7 with 1 blow. "But, tailor, are you not wounded at all?" asked the horseman. "You needn't concern yourself about that," said the tailor. "They have not bent a single hair of mine." But the horseman would not believe him, and rode into the forest. There they found the giants swimming in their blood, and all around lay the torn and mangled branches of the trees. The little tailor demanded of the king the promised reward. He, however, repented of his promise, and again thought himself how he could get rid of this gallant hero. "Before you receive my daughter and half of the kingdom," said the king, "you must perform one last heroic deed. In the forest roams a unicorn, which does great harm. You must catch it first. I fear 1 unicorn, still less than 2 giants. 7 at 1 blow is my kind of affair." He took a rope and an axe with him, and went forth into the forest, and again bade those who were sent with him to wait outside. He had not long to seek. The unicorn soon came towards him, and rushed directly upon the tailor, as if it would gore him with its horn without more ado. "Softly, softly, it can't be done as quickly as that," said he, and stood still and waited until the animal was quite close, and then sprang nimbly behind a tree. The unicorn ran against the tree with all of its strength, and stuck its horn so fast in the trunk that it had not the strength enough to draw it out again, and thus it was caught. "Now, I have got the bird," said the tailor, and came out from behind the tree and put the rope around its neck, and then with his axe he hewed the horn out of the tree, and when all was ready, he led the beast away and took it to the king. But the king would still not give him the promised reward, and made a third demand. Before the wedding, the tailor was to catch him a wild boar that made a great havoc in the forest, and the huntsmen should give their help. "Willingly," said the tailor. "This is nothing. Child's play, in fact." He did not take the huntsmen with him into the forest, and they were well pleased that he did not, for the wild boar had several times received them in such a manner that they had very little inclination to lie in wait for him. When the boar perceived the tailor, it ran on him with foaming mouth and whetted tusk, and was about to throw him on the ground. But the hero fled and sprang into a chapel which was near and up to the window at once, and in one bound out again. The boar ran after him, but the tailor ran around outside and shut the door behind it. And then the raging beast, which was much too heavy and awkward to leap out the window, was caught in a trap. The little tailor caught the huntsmen thither, that they might see the prisoner with their own eyes. The hero, however, went to the king, who was now, whether he liked it or not, obliged to keep his promise, and gave his daughter and the half of his kingdom. Had he known that it was no warlike hero, but a little tailor who was standing before him, it would have gone to his heart still more than it did. The wedding was held with great magnificence and small joy, and out of a tailor a king was made. After some time, the queen heard her husband say in his dreams at night, "Boy, make me the doublet, and patch the pantaloons, or else I will wrap the yard measure over your ears." And then she had discovered in what state of life the young lord had been born. The next morning she complained of the wrongs to her father, and begged him to help her get rid of her husband, who was nothing else but a tailor. The king comforted her and said, "My daughter, leave your bedroom door open this night, and my servants shall stand outside, and when he has fallen asleep I shall go in, bind him, and take him on board a ship, which shall carry him into the wide world." The woman was satisfied with this, but the king's armor-bearer, who heard all, was friendly with the young lord, and informed him of the whole plot. The little tailor was not impressed, and he said, "I'll put a screw into that business." At night he went to bed with his wife at the usual time, and when she thought that he had fallen asleep, she got up, opened the door, and lay down again. The little tailor, who was only pretending to be asleep, began to cry out in a clear voice, "Boy, make me the doublet and patch me the pantaloons, or I will wrap the yard measure over your ears. I smote 7 at one blow. I killed 2 giants. I brought away 1 unicorn. I caught a wild boar. And am I to fear those who are standing outside my room?" And when these men heard the tailor speaking thus, they were overcome by a great dread, and ran as if the wild huntsmen were behind them, and none of them would venture anything further against him. So the little tailor was and remained a king to the very end of his days. And now the tale of Hansel and Gretel. You probably know that one too. This one is as told by the Brothers Grimm as with the other folk tales that we've discussed. Hard by a great forest dwelt a poor woodcutter with his wife and his 2 children. The boy was called Hansel, and the girl was called Gretel. He had little to bite and to break, and once when a great dearth fell over the land, he could no longer procure even daily bread. Now when he thought of this by night in his bed, and tossed about in his anxiety, he groaned and said to his wife, "What is to become of us? How are we to feed our poor children, when we no longer have anything even for ourselves?" "I'll tell you what, husband," answered the woman. "Early tomorrow morning we will take the children out into the forest to where it is the thickest, where we will light a fire for them, and give each of them 1 more piece of bread, and then we will go to our work and leave them alone. They will not find the way home again, and we shall be rid of them." "No, my wife," said the man, "I will most certainly not do that. How can I bear to leave my children alone in the forest? The wild animals will soon come and tear them to pieces." "Well then, you are a fool," said the wife. "Then we must all 4 of us die of hunger. You may as well plane the planks for our coffins." And she left him no peace until he consented. "Oh, but I feel very sorry for the poor children all the same," said the man. The 2 children had also not been able to sleep for their hunger, and heard what their stepmother had said to their father. Poor Gretel wept bitter tears, and she said to Hansel, "Now all is over with us." "Be quiet, Gretel," said Hansel. "Do not distress yourself. I will soon find a way to help us." And when the old folks had fallen asleep, he got up, put on his little coat, opened the door below, and crept outside. The moon shone so brightly, and the white pebbles which lay in front of the house glittered like real silver pennies. Hansel stooped and stuffed the little pocket of his coat with as many as he could get in, and then he went back and said to Gretel, "Be comforted, my dear sister, and sleep in peace. I know that God will not forsake us." And he lay down again in his bed. When day had dawned, but before the sun had risen, the woman came and awoke the 2 children, saying, "Get up, you sluggards. We are going into the forest to fetch wood." She gave each a little piece of bread and said, "There is something for your dinner, but do not eat it up before then, for you will get nothing else." Gretel took the bread under her apron, as Hansel had the pebbles in his pocket. Then they all set out together on the way to the forest. When they had walked a short time, Hansel stood still and peeped back at the house, and did so again and again. His father noticed this and said, "Hansel, why are you looking at there and staying behind for? Pay attention. Don't forget how to use your legs." "Ah, but father," said Hansel, "I am looking at my little white cat, which is sitting up on the roof and wants to say goodbye to me." The wife said, "Fool, that is not your little cat. That is the morning sun which is shining on the chimneys." Hansel, however, had not been looking back at the cat, but had been constantly throwing one of the white pebble stones out of his pocket onto the road. When they had reached the middle of the forest, the father said, "Now, children, pile up some wood, and I will light a fire that you may not be cold." Thus Hansel and Gretel gathered brushwood together, as high as a little hill. The brushwood was lighted, and when the flames were burning very high, the woman said, "Now, children, lay yourselves down by the fire and rest. We will go into the forest and cut some wood. When we are done, we will come back and fetch you right away." Thus Hansel and Gretel sat by the fire, and when noon came, each ate a little piece of bread, and as they heard the strokes of the wood axe, they believed their father was near. It was not the axe, however, but a branch which he had fastened to a withered tree with which the wind was blowing backwards and forwards. And as they had been sitting such a long time, their eyes closed with fatigue, and they fell fast asleep. When they at last awoke, it was already dark at night. Gretel began to cry, and said, "How are we going to get out of the forest now?" But Hansel comforted her, and said, "Just wait a little, until the moon has risen, and then we will soon find the way, I promise." And when the full moon had risen, Hansel took his little sister by the hand, and followed the pebbles which shone like newly coined silver pieces, and showed them the way. They walked the whole night long, and by the break of day came once more to their father's house. They knocked upon the door, and when the woman opened it and saw that it was Hansel and Gretel, she said, "You naughty children! Why have you slept so long in the forest? We thought you were never coming back at all." But the father rejoiced, for it had cut him to the heart to leave the children behind him. Not long afterwards, there was once more a great dearth throughout the land, and the children heard their mother saying at night to their father, "Everything is eaten. We have but 1/2 loaf left, and that is the end. The children must go. We will take them farther into the wood, so that they will not find their way out again. There is no other means of saving ourselves." The man's heart was heavy, and he thought it would be better for you to share the last mouthful with your children. The woman, however, would listen to nothing that he had to say, but scolded and reproached him. He who says A must say B likewise, and as he has yielded the first time, he had to do a second time also. The children, however, were still awake and had heard the conversation. Thus when the old folks were asleep, Hansel got up once again, and wanted to go out and pick up pebbles as he had done before, but the woman had locked the door, and Hansel could not get out. Nevertheless, he comforted his little sister. "Do not cry, Gretel," he said. "Go to sleep quickly. The good God will help us." Early in the morning came the woman, and took the children out of their beds. Their piece of bread was given to them, but it was still smaller than the time before. On the way into the forest, Hansel crumbled his in his pocket, and often stood still and threw a morsel on the ground. "Hansel, why do you stop and look around?" said the father. "Go on." "I am looking back at my little pigeon which is sitting on the roof, and wants to say good-bye to me," answered Hansel. "Fool," said the woman, "that is not your little pigeon, that is the morning sun shining on the chimney." Hansel, however, little by little, threw all of the crumbs on the path. The woman led the children still deeper and deeper into the forest. where they had never in their lives been before. And then a great fire was again made, and the mother said, "Just sit there, children, and when you are tired you may sleep a little. We are going into the forest to cut wood, and in the evening when we are done, we will come back and fetch you away." When it was noon, Gretel shared her piece of bread with Hansel, who scattered his by the way. Then they fell asleep and evening passed, but nobody came to the poor, poor children. They did not awake until it was a dark night, and Hansel comforted his little sister. He said, "Just wait, Gretel, until the moon rises. Then we shall see the crumbs of bread which I have strewn about. They will show us our way home again, I'm sure of it." When the moon came they set out, but they found no crumbs, for the many thousands of birds which fly about in the woods and fields had picked them all clean. Hansel said to Gretel, "We shall soon find the way." But they did not find it. They walked the whole night, and all the next day from morning till evening, but they did not get out of the forest, and they began to get very hungry, for they had nothing to eat but 2 or 3 berries which grew upon the ground. And as they were so weary that their legs could carry them no longer, they lay down beneath a tree, and once more fell asleep. It was now 3 mornings since they had left their father's house. They began to walk again, but they always came deeper into the forest, and if help did not come soon, they would surely die of hunger and weariness. When it was midday, they saw a beautiful snow-white bird sitting on a bough, which sang so delightfully that they stood still and listened to it. And when its song was over, it spread its wings and flew away before them, and they followed it until they reached a little house, on the roof of which it alighted, and when they approached the little house, they saw that it was built of bread and covered with sweet cakes, but the windows were of clear sugar. "We will set to work on that," said Hansel, "and have a very good meal. I will eat a bit of the roof, and you, Gretel, you can eat some of the window. That will taste very sweet, don't you think?" Hansel reached up above and broke off a little of the roof to try how it tasted, and Gretel leant against the window and nibbled at the panes. And then a soft voice cried from the parlour, "Who is nibbling at my little house?" The children answered, the wind, the heaven-born wind," and went on eating without disturbing themselves. Hansel, who liked the taste of the roof, tore down a great piece of it, and Gretel pushed out the hole of one of the round window panes, sat down, and enjoyed herself with it. But suddenly the door opened, and a woman as old as the hills and the mountains and the rivers, who supported herself on crutches, came creeping out. The children were so terribly frightened that they let fall what they had in their hands. But the old woman nodded her head and said to them, "Oh, you dear children, what has brought you here? Do come in and stay with me. No harm shall happen to you." She took them both by the hand and led them into her little house. And then good food was set before them, milk and pancakes, with sugar, apples, and all sorts of nuts and biscuits. Afterwards, 2 pretty little beds were covered with clean white linen, and Hansel and Gretel lay down in them, and they thought that they might just be in heaven. But the woman, well, she had only pretended to be so kind, but she was in reality a very wicked old witch who laid in wait for the children and had only built the little house of bread in order to entice them there. When a child fell into her power, she killed it, cooked it, and ate it. And that was a feast day with her. Now, witches, they have red eyes and cannot see very far, but they have a keen scent like the beasts, and are aware when human beings draw near. When Hansel and Gretel came into her neighborhood, she laughed with malice, and said mockingly, "I have them. They shall not escape me." Early in the morning, before the children were awake, she was already up, and when she saw both of them sleeping and looking so pretty, with their plump and rosy cheeks, she muttered to herself, "They will be a dainty mouthful." And then she seized Hansel with her shriveled little hand, carried him into the little stable, and locked him behind a grated door. He screamed and screamed, but no one or nothing could help him. And then she went to Gretel, shook her till she awoke, and cried, "Get up, you lazy thing. Fetch some water and cook something good for your brother. He is in the stable outside, and is to be made fat. When he is nice and fat, I am going to eat him." Gretel began to weep bitterly, but this too was all in vain, for she was forced to do what the witch had commanded. And now the best food, and all manner of it, was cooked for the poor Hansel, but Gretel got nothing but crab shells. Every morning the woman crept to the little stable and cried, "Hansel, stretch out your finger, that I may feel if you will soon be fat." Hansel, however, stretched out a little bone to her, and the old woman, who had those dim witch eyes, could not see it, thus thought it was Hansel's finger, and was quite astonished that there was no way of fattening him. When 4 weeks had gone by, and Hansel remained thin, she was seized with impatience, and would not wait any longer. "Now then, Gretel," she cried to the girl, "stir yourself and bring some water. Let Hansel be fat or lean. Tomorrow I will kill and cook him." How the poor little sister did lament when she had to fetch the water, and how her tears flowed down her cheeks. Dear God, please help us," she cried. "If the beasts in the forest but have devoured us, we should at any rate have died together." "Keep your noise to yourself," said the old woman. "It won't help you at all, not now." Early in the morning, Gretel had to go out and hang up the cauldron with the water, and light the fire. "We will bake first," said the old woman. "I have already heated the oven and heated the dough." She pushed poor Gretel out to the oven, from which the flames of fire were already darting. "Creep in," said the witch, "and see if it is properly heated, so that we can put the bread in." And once Gretel was inside, she intended to shut the oven and let her bake in it, and then she would eat her too. But Gretel was not stupid, and she saw what the old cruel witch had in mind, and she said, "I do not know how I am to do it, how do I actually get in?" "You silly girl," said the old woman. "The door is big enough. Just look, I can get in myself." And she crept up and thrust her head into the oven. But then Gretel, with all her strength, gave her a push that drove her far, far into it, and then she slammed shut the iron door, fastening the bolt. Oh, then she began to howl quite horribly. But Gretel ran away, and the godless witch was miserably burned to death. Gretel, however, ran like lightning to Hansel, opened his little stable, and cried out to him, "Hansel, we're saved. The old witch is dead." Then Hansel sprang like a bird from its cage when the door is open, and how they did rejoice, and laugh and embrace each other, and dance about. And as they had no longer any need to fear her, they went into the witch's house, and in every corner there stood chests full of pearls and jewels. "These are far better than pebbles," said Hansel, and thrust into his pockets whatever could be got. And Gretel said, "I too will take something home with me," and filled her pockets full. "But now, Gretel, we must be off," said Hansel, "that we may get out of this horrible witch's forest." When they had walked for 2 hours, they came to a great stretch of water. "We cannot cross this," said Hansel. "I see no foot-plank and no bridge." "There is also no ferry," answered Gretel. "But there is a white duck swimming over there. Perhaps if I ask her, she will help us over." And so she cried out, little duck, dost thou see? Hansel and Gretel are waiting for thee. There's never a plank or bridge in sight. Take us across on your back so white." The duck came to them, and Hansel seated himself on its back, and told his sister to sit by him. No, we cannot do this," replied Gretel. "That would be too heavy for the little duck. She shall take us across, one after the other." And the good little duck did so, and when they were once safely across, and had walked for a short time, the forest began to seem more and more familiar to them, and at length they saw from afar their father's house. They began to run, rushed into the parlor, and threw themselves around their father. The man had not known one happy moment since he had left the children in the forest, and the woman, well, she was dead. Gretel emptied her pockets until pearls and precious stones ran about the room, rolling to and fro, and Hansel threw one handful after another out of his pocket to add to them, and then all the anxiety was at an end, and they lived together in perfect, beautiful happiness. The tale is done. There runs a mouse. Whosoever catches it may make himself a big fur cap out of it. And now, the tale of the mouse, the bird, and the sausage. Once upon a time, a mouse, a bird, and a sausage entered into partnership and set up a house together. For a long time, everything went well. They lived in a great amount of comfort, and prospered so far as to be able to add considerably to their stores. The bird's duty was to fly daily into the wood and bring in fuel. The mouse fetched water, and the sausage saw to the cooking. When people are too well off, they seem to always begin to long for something new, and so it came to pass that the bird, while out one day, met a fellow bird, to whom he boastfully expatiated on the excellence of his household arrangement. But the other bird sneered at him for being a poor simpleton who did all the hard work, while the other two stayed at home and had good time of it. For when the mouse had made the fire and fetched the water, she could retire into her little room and rest until it was time to set the table. The sausage had only to watch the pot and see that the food was properly cooked, and when it was near dinner time, he just threw himself into the broth, or rolled in and out among the vegetables 3 or 4 times, and there they were, buttered, salted, and very much ready to be served. Then, when the bird came home and had laid aside his own burdens, they sat down to the table, and when they had finished their meal, they could sleep their fill till the following morning, and that was really quite a delightful life for everyone. Well, influenced by these remarks, the bird felt that he would go home the next morning and simply refuse to bring in the wood, telling the others that he had been their servant for long enough, and had been a fool in this bargain, and that it was indeed now time to make a change, and to try some other way of arranging the work. Beg and pray as the mouse and the sausage might, it was of no use. The bird remained master of the situation, and the venture had to be made. They therefore drew lots, and it fell to the sausage to bring in the wood, to the mouse to cook, and to the bird to fetch the water. And now, what would happen then? Well, the sausage started in search of wood, the bird made the fire, and the mouse put on the pot, and then these two waited till the sausage returned with the fuel for the following day. But you see, the sausage remained so long away that they became uneasy, and the bird flew out to meet him. He had not flown far, however, when he came across a vicious dog, who had met the sausage, of course, and regarded him as legitimate prize, and had so seized and swallowed him. The bird complained to the dog of this barefaced robbery, but nothing he said was of any avail, for the dog answered that he had found false credentials on the sausage, and that was the reason his life had been forfeited. He picked up the wood and flew sadly home, and told the mouse of all he had seen and heard. They were, of course, both very unhappy, but agreed to make the best of things, and to remain with one another. So now the bird set the table, and the mouse looked after the food, wishing to prepare it in the same way as the sausage, by rolling in and out among the vegetables to salt and butter them. She jumped into the pot, but she stopped short long before she reached the bottom, having already parted not only with her skin and hair, but also her life. Presently the bird came in and wanted to serve up dinner, but he could nowhere see where the cook was. In his alarm and flurry, he threw the wood here and there about the floor, called and searched, but the mouse was nowhere to be found. Then some of the wood had been carelessly thrown down, caught fire, and began to blaze. The bird hastened to fetch some water, but his pail fell into the well, and he fell in right after it. And, well, as he was right well unable to recover himself, he was drowned. The Tale of Mother Holle. Once upon a time long, long ago, there was a widow who had 2 daughters. One of them was beautiful and industrious. The other was quite the opposite, ugly and lazy. The mother, however, loved the ugly and lazy one best, because she was her own daughter, and so the other was only her stepdaughter, was made to do all of the housework, and was quite the Cinderella of the family. Her stepmother sent her out every day to sit by the well in the high road, there to spin until she made her fingers bleed. Now, it chanced one day that some blood had fell onto the spindle, and as the girl stopped over the well to wash it off, the spindle suddenly sprang out of her hand and fell down into the well. She ran home crying to tell of her misfortune, but her stepmother spoke harshly and cruelly to her, and after giving her a violent scolding, said unkindly, "As you have let the spindle fall into the well, you may as well go yourself and fetch it out. After all, it's your fault." The girl went back to the well, not knowing what to do, and at last, in her distress, she jumped into the water after the spindle. Well, she remembered nothing more, until she awoke and found herself in a beautiful meadow, full of sunshine, with countless flowers blooming in every direction. She walked over the meadow, and presently she came upon a baker's oven full of bread, and the loaves cried out to her, take us out, or alas, we shall be burned to a cinder. Oh, we were baked through long ago, please take us out." She took the bread shovel and drew them all out of the oven. She went on a little farther, till she came to a tree full of apples. shake me, I pray," cried the tree. "My apples, one and all, are all ripe." So she shook the tree, and the apples came falling down upon her like rain. But she continued shaking until there was not a single apple left upon it. Then she carefully gathered the apples together in a heap, and kept on her journey. The next thing she came to was a little house, and there she saw an old woman looking out, with such large teeth that she was terrified and turned to run away. But the old woman called out to her, "What are you afraid of, dear child? Oh, stay with me. If you will do the work of my house properly for me, I will make you very happy. Oh, you must be very careful, however, to make my bed in the right way, for I wish you always to shake it thoroughly, so that the feathers fly about, you see. Then they say down there in the world that it is snowing, for I am Mother Holle." The old woman spoke so kindly and honestly that the girl summoned up courage and agreed to enter her service. She took care to do everything according to the old woman's bidding, and every time she made the bed she shook it with all of her might, so that all the feathers flew about like so many snowflakes dancing in the air. The old woman was as good as her word, and she never spoke angrily to her, and gave her roast and boiled meats every day. So she stayed on with Mother Holle for some time, but then, little by little, she began to grow unhappy. She could not at first tell why she felt sad, but she soon became conscious at the last great longing to go home, and then she knew that she was indeed homesick, although she was thousands of times better off with Mother Holle, than with her mother and sister, so cruel to her. After waiting a while, she went to Mother Holle and said, "I am so homesick that I cannot stay with you any longer, and although I am so happy here, I must return to my own people." And then Mother Holle said, "I am pleased that you should want to go back to your own people, and as you have served me so well and faithfully, I will take you home myself." Thereupon she led the girl by the hand up to a broad gateway. The gate was opened, and as the girl passed through, a shower of gold fell upon her, and the gold clung to her so that she was covered with it from head to foot. "That is a reward for your industry," said Mother Holle, and as she spoke she handed her the spindle which she had dropped into the well so long ago. "Cock-a-doodle-doo, your golden daughter has come back to you." And then she went in to her mother and sister, and as she was so richly covered with gold, well, they had no choice but to give her a warm welcome. She related to them all that had happened, and when the mother heard how she had come by her great riches, she thought she should like her ugly, lazy daughter to go and try and find her own fortune too. So she made the sister go and sit by the well and spin, and the girl pricked her finger and thrust her hand into a thorn bush, so that she might drop some blood on the spindle. Then she threw it down the well and jumped in herself. Like her sister, she awoke in a beautiful meadow, and walked over it till she came to the oven. take us out, or alas, we shall be burned to a cinder." "We were baked through long ago," cried the loaves of bread as before. But the lazy girl answered, "Ew, do you think I'm going to get my hands dirty for you?" And she walked on. Then she came to the apple tree. shake me, I pray, my apples one and all are ripe," it cried. But she only answered, "A nice thing to ask me to do. One of the apples might fall on my head." And then she passed on. At last she came to Mother Holle's house, and as she had heard all about the large teeth from her sister, she was not afraid of them, and engaged herself without delay to the old woman. The first day she was very obedient and industrious, and exerted herself to please Mother Holle, for she was quite convinced and looking forward to the gold she sought in return. The next day, however, things began to change. She began to dawdle over her work, and the third day she was more idle still. And then, finally, she began to lie in bed in the mornings, and simply refused to get up. Worse still, she neglected to make the old woman's bed properly, and forgot to shake it so the feathers might fly about. Mother Holle, well, she got very tired of her very soon, and told her that she might simply go. Of course, the lazy girl was delighted at this, and thought to herself, "The gold will soon be mine." Mother Holle led her, as she had led her sister, to the broad gateway. But as she was passing through, instead of a shower of gold, a great bucket full of pitch came pouring all over her. "This is in return for your services," said the old woman, and promptly shut the gate. So the lazy girl had to go home covered with pitch, and the rooster on the well called out just as she saw her, Cock-a-doodle-doo, your dirty daughter has come back to you. But try what she would, she could not get the pitch off her skin, and it stuck to her for the rest of her days. And now, the tale of Little Red Riding Hood, also known as Little Red Cap. Once upon a time there was a dear little girl who was loved by everybody who laid eyes upon her, but most of all by her grandmother, and there was nothing she would not have given to her darling child. Once she gave her a little cap of red velvet, which suited her so well that she would never wear anything else, and so she was always called Little Red Cap. One day her mother said to her, "Come, Little Red Cap, here is a piece of cake and a bottle of wine. Take them to your grandmother. She is ill and weak, and they will do her good. Set out before it gets hot, and when you are going, walk nicely and quietly, and do not run off the path, or you may fall and break the bottle, and then your grandmother, well, she will get nothing. And when you go into her room, don't forget to say, 'Good morning,' and peep into every corner before you do it." "I will take great care," said Little Red Cap to her mother, and gave her hand on it. Now the grandmother lived out in the wood, half a league from the village, and just as Little Red Cap entered the wood, a wolf met her. Red Cap was unaware of what a wicked creature he was, and was not at all afraid of him. "Good day, Little Red Cap," said the wolf. "Thank you kindly, Wolf." "Whither away so early, Little Red Cap?" "Yes, to my grandmother's." "What have you got in your apron?" "Cake and wine. Yesterday was baking all day, so poor sick grandmother is to have something good to make her stronger, you see." "Ah, and where does your grandmother live, Little Red Cap?" "A good quarter of a league further on in the wood. Her house stands under the 3 large oak trees. The nut trees are just below." "Surely you know it," replied Little Red Cap. It was then the wolf had thought to himself, "What a tender young creature! Nice, plump mouthful. She will be better to eat than the old woman. I must act craftily so as to catch both." So he walked for a short time by the side of Little Red Cap, and then he said, "You see, Little Red Cap, how pretty the flowers are about here. Why do you not look round? I believe, too, that you do not hear how sweetly the little birds are singing. You walk gravely along, as if you were going to school, while everything else out in the wood is so merry." Little Red Cap raised her eyes, and when she saw the sunbeams dancing here and there through the trees, and pretty flowers growing everywhere, she thought, "Suppose I take grandmother a fresh nosegay. That would please her too, surely. Anyway, it's so early in the day that I shall get there in good time, I'm sure of it." And so she ran from the path into the wood to look for flowers. Whenever she picked one, she fancied that she saw a still prettier one farther on, and ran after it, and so in this way got deeper and deeper into the deep woods. Meanwhile, the wolf ran straight to the grandmother's house, and knocked at the door. "Who is there?" said the old woman. The wolf replied, "Little Red Cap. She is bringing cake and wine. "Oh, open the door, grandmother." "Okay, just lift the latch," called out the grandmother. "Oh, I'm just too weak and I cannot get up." The wolf lifted the latch. The door sprang open, and without saying a single word, he went straight to the grandmother's bed and devoured her. Then he put on her clothes, dressed himself in her cap, laid himself in bed, and drew the curtains. Little Redcap, however, had been running about picking flowers, and when she had gathered so many that she could carry no more, she remembered her grandmother and set out on the way to her. She was surprised, because when she got there, the cottage door was standing open, and when she went into the room, she had a strange feeling that she said to herself, "Oh dear, how strangely uneasy I feel today, and at other times I like being with grandmother so much." Then she called out, "Good morning," but received no answer. So she went to the bed and drew back the curtains. There lay her grandmother, with her cap pulled far over her face, and she seemed to look very, very strange. "Oh, grandmother, what big ears you have." "The better to hear you with, my child," was the reply. "But, grandmother, what big eyes you have." "The better to see you with, my dear." "But, grandmother, what large hands you have." "Oh, the better to hug you with." "Oh, but, grandmother, what a terrible big mouth you have." "The better to eat you with." And scarcely had the wolf said this, than with one bound he was out of bed and swallowed up Little Redcap. When the wolf had appeased his appetite, he lay down again in the bed. He fell asleep, and he began to snore very loudly. The huntsman was just passing the house, and he thought to himself, "Oh, how the old woman is snoring. I must just see if she wants anything." So he went into the room, and when he came to the bed, he saw the wolf was lying in it. "Do I find you here, you old sinner?" said he. "I have long sought you out." Then, just as he was going to fire off an arrow at him, it occurred to him that the wolf might have devoured the grandmother, and that she might still be saved. So he stayed his arrow and did not fire, but he took a pair of scissors and began to cut open the stomach of the sleeping beast. When he had made 2 snips, he saw the little red cap shining, and then he made 2 more snips, and the little girl sprang out, crying, "Oh, how frightened I've been! How dark it is inside the horrible, terrible wolf!" And after that, the aged grandmother came out alive and well also, but scarcely able to breathe, and in a right panic state. Redcap, however, quickly fetched great stones, with which they filled the wolf's belly, and when he awoke, he wanted to run away in fear, but the stones were so heavy that he collapsed at once, and fell there dead. Then all 3 were delighted. The huntsman drew off the wolf's skin and went home with it. The grandmother ate the cake and drank the wine which Redcap had bought, and got better. But Redcap thought to herself, "As long as I live, I will never by myself leave the path to run into the wood. when my mother has forbidden me to do so. It is also related that once when Redcap was again taking cakes to the old grandmother, another wolf had came upon her and tried to entice her from her good path. Redcap, however, was this time on her guard, and went straight forward on her way, and told her grandmother she had met with the wolf, and that he had said good morning to her, but with such a wicked look in his eyes, that if they had not been on the public road, she was certain he would have eaten her up. "Well," said the grandmother, "we will shut the door, that he may not come in." Soon afterwards the wolf knocked and cried, "Open the door, grandmother. I am little Redcap, and I am bringing you some cakes." But they did not speak, nor did they open the door. So the grey beard stole twice or thrice around the house, and at last jumped on the roof, intending to wait until Redcap went home in the evening, and then to steal after her and devour her in the darkness. But the grandmother saw what was in his thoughts. In front of the house was a great stone trough. So she said to the child, "Take the pail, Redcap. I made some sausages yesterday, so carry the water in which I boiled them to the trough." Redcap carried until the great trough was quite full. Then the smell of sausages reached the wolf, and he sniffed and peeped down, and at last stretched out his neck so far he could no longer keep his footing, and began to slip, and thus he slipped down from the roof straight into that great trough, and was drowned. But Redcap went joyously on her way home, and from that day onwards no one ever did anything to harm her again. Thank you very much for listening. I would like to thank my top-tier patrons, Charles, Stark Factory, JC, Jeffrey, Wendy, Tim, James, Eric, and Scott. This has been a reading from the Grimm's Fairy Tales. Grimm by name, and Grimm by nature. Thank you so much for listening. And I'm sure that I will see you in part 3. Good night, everybody. Lots of love, and be careful on the roads.